The world of high fashion sparkles under bright lights, but behind the glamour hides a darker truth. At a glittering party hosted by one of the youngest billionaires in America, cameras flashed, glasses clinked, and all eyes were on wealth and power. But when a celebrated black woman model walked into the room, everything changed. In a moment that would shock the fashion world and ignite a firestorm of outrage, the billionaire's hand tipped a glass of red wine, not by accident, but with cold intention. What drove him to humiliate her so cruelly in front of the elite? This is the story the headlines won't tell you. The night had been planned for months, an exclusive gala in the heart of New York City. The venue, a glass-walled tower overlooking Central Park, shimmered like a jewel in the skyline. For the billionaire at the center of it all, this wasn't just another social gathering. It was a statement of power. He was only 31 years old, but already his name was carved into the upper echelons of wealth, whispered among investors, socialites, and political figures. The invitations were deliberately scarce. Gold-edged cards delivered not through email, but by hand. The guest list read like a who's who of industry leaders, Hollywood stars, and fashion royalty. No expense had been spared, chandeliers imported from Paris, vintage wines uncorked with ceremony, music performed by a live orchestra in the corner of the hall. Every detail screamed luxury, but beneath the glitter, there was something colder, something calculated. The billionaire had built his fortune on the kind of empire that thrived on appearance, luxury retail, investments in fashion houses, and controlling interests in modeling agencies. He was praised for his youth, his vision, his charm. Yet those who worked beneath him often whispered about another side, arrogance that bordered on cruelty, entitlement that brooked no defiance, and a disdain for those who didn't fit neatly into his image of perfection. That evening, the air shimmered with excitement. Journalists lingered outside, paparazzi bulbs flashing each time a limousine rolled up to the red carpet. Inside, guests in gowns and tuxedos sipped champagne while exchanging pleasantries. The billionaire moved among them like a conductor, orchestrating smiles and admiration. He knew the weight his presence carried. With a nod, he could elevate a designer. With a dismissive glance, he could end a career. Into this carefully constructed world walked a woman who had already fought harder battles than many in the room could imagine. She was a model, but not just any model. She had risen from obscurity to become a name recognized in fashion capitals. Her beauty was undeniable, tall, graceful, skin like polished bronze that reflected every glimmer of light. But beyond her looks, it was her resilience that set her apart. She had faced rejection, endured prejudice, and clawed her way into spaces where women who looked like her were often unwelcome. Tonight was not just another gala for her. It was an opportunity. She had been invited by one of the sponsors, a designer whose collection she had recently fronted. The invitation itself had raised eyebrows. After all, the billionaire wasn't known for embracing diversity in his inner circle. But she arrived poised, every step across the marble floor measured, her presence impossible to ignore. At first, eyes turned toward her with admiration. Whispers followed. Who was she wearing? Where had she modeled? How had she secured a place here? She smiled with quiet confidence, aware of the scrutiny, but refusing to shrink. To her, this was a chance not just to be seen, but to stand equal in a room that had too often dismissed women like her. The billionaire noticed her almost immediately. He was standing near the center of the room, glass in hand, surrounded by admirers. His gaze flickered across the crowd and landed on her. For a moment, his expression froze, not admiration, but something sharper. Displeasure. Annoyance. As if her very presence disrupted the perfection of his carefully curated event. He watched as she moved with ease, exchanging greetings with designers and photographers, her laugh soft yet commanding attention. Guests who once gravitated toward him began to drift toward her, curious, drawn by the freshness she brought into the stale circle of privilege. That shift, subtle as it was, stung him. The billionaire's life had been one long narrative of control. He controlled his companies, his image, his relationships. Rarely did anyone take the spotlight from him in his own domain. And here she was, a black woman model, standing tall, shining brighter than the crystal chandeliers above. It unsettled him in ways he couldn't name, but his pride demanded a response. As the evening wore on, the orchestra's music swelled, the champagne flowed, and conversations deepened. Yet the billionaire's focus never strayed far from her. To those who knew him best, the narrowing of his eyes was a warning sign. Something was building beneath the polished exterior. He wasn't one to let perceived slights go unanswered, even when they existed only in his imagination. The model, unaware of the storm she was stirring, found herself near a circle of photographers who eagerly praised her latest runway performance. She spoke with humility, acknowledging her journey and the challenges she had faced. To some in the room, her words were inspiring. To others, they were an uncomfortable reminder of the walls they had helped build in the industry. The billionaire drifted closer, his presence drawing silence from those nearby. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. In his hand was a glass of the most expensive red wine, vintage Bordeaux that had been flown in just for the occasion. He swirled it lazily, the deep crimson catching the light. Guests watched, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. They saw a man of power standing beside a woman of rising influence, two worlds colliding in a moment charged with unspoken conflict. For the model, this was just another introduction, another chance to prove she belonged. For the billionaire, it was something else entirely. He leaned slightly, his voice low, his words lost beneath the hum of the orchestra. But his gesture, slow, deliberate, would not be forgotten. The glass tilted, wine cascading not toward the floor, but across the shimmering fabric of her gown. Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked. Time seemed to fracture as the vibrant red spread across the silver of her dress, staining not just fabric, but pride. The model froze, her breath caught in her throat. Around her, whispers rose like a wave. Some looked away in discomfort, others leaned closer, hungry for scandal. The billionaire's smile lingered, as if he had made a point no one dared challenge. To him, it was an act of dominance. To her, it was humiliation, sharp and public. But humiliation was only the surface. Beneath it lay the weight of history, of countless moments when women like her had been dismissed, degraded, made to feel small in rooms of privilege. And yet, in that instant, as the wine dripped from the hem of her gown, she stood straighter. The sting of betrayal cut deep, but it also lit a fire that would not be extinguished. The night was far from over. What began as a glittering celebration would unravel into a story of betrayal, prejudice, and resilience. The billionaire believed he had silenced her. He had no idea he had awakened something far greater. The room had fallen into that peculiar silence born of shock, murmurs at the edges, darting glances, but no one bold enough to step in. In the world of wealth and exclusivity, power was as tangible as the marble underfoot, and the billionaire's power was absolute. Guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between the desire to look away and the magnetic pull of spectacle. The model, her dress ruined, her pride wounded, stood still. Not out of defeat, but out of calculation. Every muscle in her body urged her to recoil, to storm out, to abandon this glittering hall of hypocrisy. But she did not. She steadied herself, her chin lifting ever so slightly, her eyes locking with the billionaire's smug expression. He expected her collapse, her retreat. Instead, he found defiance. Still, the weight of humiliation pressed on her chest. She could hear the whispers gathering like storm clouds. Did you see what he did? Why would he? She shouldn't have been here. These weren't just words. They were daggers laced with centuries of prejudice. She knew them well. Too many times she had been told she didn't belong, that she was out of place in a world curated for others. The billionaire relished the moment. For him, this was an assertion of hierarchy. In his mind, she was an intruder, a symbol of change in an industry he preferred to control. By staining her gown, he sought to stain her presence, reduce her brilliance to a cautionary tale. But outside the circle of murmurs, others were watching. A few photographers, lenses still warm from their flashes, had captured every detail. The tilt of the glass, The crimson splash. The shock on her face. Images that, in time, would ripple far beyond the gilded walls of this tower. The model excused herself with grace that belied the turmoil inside. She didn't storm away, though every instinct screamed for it. Instead, she walked toward the powder room, each step deliberate, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her collapse. Her gown clung wetly, the red stark against silver, a scar that marked her in ways fabric alone could not. Behind her, the party attempted to recover its rhythm. Laughter resumed, though strained. Glasses clinked, though quieter. The billionaire, pleased with his display, returned to his circle of admirers, though something in the air had shifted. His gesture had not been forgotten. It lingered, unspoken, an act that could not be smoothed over with charm or wealth. In the powder room, the model stood before the mirror. Her reflection told two stories: the external, wine-stained fabric, trembling fingers, eyes glistening, and the internal, resolve hardening, spirit unbroken, anger simmering into strength. She dabbed at the gown, though the stain only spread. She knew the damage was beyond repair. But it was not the gown that mattered. It was what the stain represented. She remembered every casting where she had been told she was too different, every runway where she was the token inclusion, every headline that treated her as novelty instead of talent. Tonight was merely another chapter in that long history. But perhaps it could also be the turning point. She left the powder room with her shoulders squared. If he wanted her shamed, he would be disappointed. If he wanted her silenced, he would find her louder than ever. The night moved forward, but the balance had shifted. Guests whispered still, their glances betraying unease. Some avoided her, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Others approached quietly, offering hollow sympathies that felt more like performances for their own conscience than genuine care. But beneath the surface, momentum was building. The photographers had not stopped clicking. Journalists outside the venue had already begun hearing rumors. The world beyond these walls was ready to receive the images, the story, the truth. The billionaire, however, remained oblivious to the scale of what he had ignited. To him, it was a fleeting act, one that would fade by morning. After all, hadn't he buried worse scandals with money and influence? Hadn't he always emerged untarnished, his empire intact? But this was different. This wasn't just arrogance. This was an act steeped in racial undertones, one that would resonate far beyond his control. As the orchestra played on, as guests tried to pretend the evening hadn't soured, the model stood taller, no longer blending into the backdrop of luxury. She had become the quiet center of the storm, the one figure no one could ignore. And soon, the storm would break. The images hit social media before the night was even over. A blurry photo at first, then sharper ones, then a video. The billionaire, glass in hand, the deliberate tilt, the cascade of wine staining her gown. Captions were unnecessary, the visuals told the story. Within minutes, hashtags erupted, outrage flared, and the event transformed from an exclusive celebration to a public scandal. Inside the tower, phones buzzed. Guests checked their screens, their polished smiles faltering as the reality of the outside world seeped in. The billionaire noticed, his brow furrowing as whispers grew louder. He demanded to know what was happening, but the answers came in fragments. It's online. People are furious. It's everywhere already. For the model, the shift was surreal. Hours earlier, she had walked into the gala hopeful, her career poised for another step forward. Now, she stood at the center of a firestorm. Yet instead of breaking her, it steadied her. The humiliation he had intended became a spotlight she could seize. The coverage spread faster than wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Young billionaire humiliates black model at gala." Wine and racism. Fashion world in uproar. Power and prejudice on display in Manhattan. Comment sections exploded with anger, solidarity, and calls for accountability. Celebrities weighed in, activists condemned the act, and fans of the model rallied to her defense. The narrative was no longer his to control. The world had seen, and the world would not forget. The billionaire attempted damage control. His team scrambled to draft statements, claims of misunderstanding, suggestions that it had been an accident. But the footage was undeniable. The deliberate tilt of the glass, the smirk on his face, the stillness in hers. No spin could erase intent. Behind the scenes, his empire began to tremble. Designers whispered about severing ties. Shareholders demanded explanations. Politicians distanced themselves. The very circle of privilege that had shielded him now wavered, unwilling to sync with him. And through it all, the model rose. She granted interviews, not with rage, but with measured grace. She spoke not only of her own experience, but of the broader struggle of doors closed, of systemic prejudice, of the countless others without a platform who had suffered in silence. Her words carried weight, her composure undeniable. She became more than a model, she became a voice. The climax of the scandal came days later, at a press conference hastily organized by the Billionaire's team. Cameras crowded the hall, reporters eager to capture his explanation. He stood at the podium, polished as ever, but cracks showed in his facade. He spoke of regret, of misunderstanding, of accidents blown out of proportion. Yet as he spoke, the room remained cold. And then, a question cut through the rehearsed speech. If it was an accident, why did you smile? The billionaire faltered. His lips parted, but no words came. The silence was damning. Cameras flashed, microphones captured the pause, and in that instant, the carefully constructed empire of charm and power crumbled. The model, watching from afar, felt the weight of vindication. Not triumph, because what had been done to her was not something that could be celebrated, but justice. A sliver of accountability in a world that so often denied it. The climax was not his downfall alone. It was her rise, her transformation from target to torchbearer. What he intended as humiliation became the catalyst for a movement that rippled beyond fashion, beyond wealth, into conversations about dignity, equality, and respect. And in that collision of arrogance and resilience, the world witnessed not just a scandal, but a reckoning. The billionaire's silence at the press conference was more devastating than any admission. In the world of power and perception, hesitation was guilt, and his pause echoed louder than his words ever could. The footage played on repeat across news networks, dissected frame by commentators, activists, and ordinary viewers who saw in his smirk the embodiment of centuries of disdain. Overnight, partnerships crumbled. Fashion houses that once clamored for his attention now rushed to sever ties, releasing carefully crafted statements of zero tolerance. Investors withdrew, stock values plummeted, and whispers of lawsuits surfaced. He had believed his wealth untouchable, a fortress against accountability. But what money could not buy was forgiveness when the truth was undeniable. For the model, life had changed in ways she could scarcely comprehend. Days ago, she had been one of many fighting for recognition in a world reluctant to embrace her. Now, her face filled headlines, her words echoed on television, her story became a symbol. But with visibility came weight, the burden of representing more than herself. Every interview, every appearance carried the hopes of others who had endured similar pain in silence. She navigated this new terrain with the same resilience that had carried her through rejection after rejection. She refused to let her identity be defined by the act of humiliation alone. Instead, she shifted the focus toward resilience, toward opportunity, toward change. When asked about the incident, she never named only her own pain. She named the structures that allowed such arrogance to thrive. Her voice, calm but firm, became impossible to ignore. And as the world debated the scandal, something larger stirred. Young models of color shared their stories of exclusion and discrimination. Designers reconsidered their casting choices, aware now of the scrutiny their silence invited. Audiences, once passive consumers of fashion's glamour, demanded accountability from the industry. The billionaire, meanwhile, retreated from public view. His once constant presence at galas and red carpets vanished. His estate gates remained closed, his social media abandoned, his empire a shell of its former self. What he had sought that night, dominance, control, the reaffirmation of his superiority, had instead destroyed him. He became not a figure of admiration, but a cautionary tale. But the true resolution was not in his fall. It was in her rise. The model went on to front global campaigns, not because of pity, but because the world finally saw what had always been there: her talent, her grace, her strength. She launched initiatives to support young women of color in fashion, creating pathways she had once been denied. She became more than a model. She became a movement. Yet, even as her career soared, she carried with her the memory of that night. Not as a wound, but as a reminder of the fire that fueled her. She understood that for every headline, countless others suffered unseen. Her platform was a responsibility, one she embraced with humility and determination. The story did not end with spilled wine on a gown. It ended with the spilling over of voices long silenced, the shattering of illusions that wealth could always protect arrogance. The gala had been meant to showcase power. Instead, it exposed its fragility. And for those who witnessed it, who read the headlines, who shared the images, the takeaway was clear: dignity is not for sale, respect cannot be silenced, and prejudice, no matter how gilded, will always be exposed in the light. The young billionaire had wanted the world to remember him for his empire, his charm, his dominance. Instead, he would forever be remembered for one moment of arrogance that unmasked him. And the model? She became the face of something far greater. Her name was etched not only in fashion but in history, a symbol of resilience that no wine stain could ever erase. As the years passed, the story was retold, not just as gossip of a scandal, but as a turning point. It reminded audiences that change often begins not in boardrooms or legislations, but in moments of betrayal that force truth into the open. And perhaps the most haunting question of all, the one that lingered long after the headlines faded, was this: how many others have been humiliated in silence, their stories untold, their dignity dismissed, because no cameras were there to capture it? The world had seen this story. But for every image that went viral, countless injustices remained hidden. And so, the responsibility rested not only on her shoulders, but on ours. To listen. To speak. To refuse to look away when arrogance attempts to trample dignity. Because power without accountability is nothing more than cruelty dressed in silk. And no chandelier, no orchestra, no tower of glass can ever disguise that truth.